Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we hike into frostbitten pastures to meet wool-wrapped farmers prepping for a 6-month food siege. You step outside your turf-walled longhouse and already your fingers sting from the morning chill. The sun has barely risen, casting its weak golden light across a landscape more brown than green autumn in medieval Iceland. There's a reason you're up early, wrapped in scratchy wool, trudging through the crunchy moss. Winter's coming, and not in a poetic, moody TV show way. More like, if you don't prepare, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boots leave faint tracks on a field that just weeks ago hosted summer grazing. Now it's time to think like a farmer, preparing not just for cold, but for total isolation. Storms here don't just rattle windows, they bury doorways. The sea freezes, livestock can starve from one bad choice in October. So today's plan is simple. Check the sheep, scan the horizon for any early frost patterns, and pray you didn't miscalculate how much hay you'll need. The sheep are your wealth, your warmth, and your winter pantry, all wrapped in one bleating wool-covered bundle. You run a hand through the thick coat of your favorite ewe. Well, favorite is generous. She once kicked you square in the shin, but she's a dependable lamb maker, and that's what matters. Farmers in this era aren't breeding for cuteness. They're running numbers in their heads. How many will birth before January? How many can survive on the stored hay? How many might not make it? This early in the season, the sheep are still on pasture, fattening themselves naturally. You won't bring them into the shelter until deep snow hits. And yes, that shelter is probably also where your family sleeps, which leads us to the smell. Living in a single-room turf longhouse with humans, animals, and fermented milk is a nasal journey. A bit of trivia for you turf houses in Iceland were often built half underground, using a layered sandwich of rock, dirt, and grass for insulation. They worked shockingly well, but also turned into medieval slow cookers for odor. The warmth was lovely. The scent, let's just say you learned to associate safety with a certain funk. Historians still argue whether Icelanders in this period truly saw their livestock as family, or simply assets that made life possible. You trudging beside these bleeding beasts with their big cartoon eyes aren't so sure. Maybe it's both. After all, you're going to sleep beside them all winter. You might even name one meatball as a joke, only to regret it come December. At the edge of your land, you pause. There's a ring of stones marking the old boundary, a legal must-have in this society. Land rights were everything, and you didn't want a neighbor accusing you of hay theft midwinter. The communal laws written down centuries later in the famous Grágás manuscripts were already evolving in oral form during your time, and most disputes, they came down to food. You crouch and run your hand across the moss. It's dry today, a good sign. If it holds through the week, the hay stored in the shed should stay dry. Wet hay is worse than useless. It rots fast and can even spontaneously combust. Yes, that's right. Medieval Icelanders may not have known the term exothermic reaction, but they knew to fear a smoking haystack. Nothing says winter tragedy like watching your sheep's only food turn into a bonfire. Your neighbor walks past with a sack slung over his shoulder and a face like it's already February. You trade a wave, no words. Everyone's too busy right now. Talk will return when the sea ice traps you all in the valley, and gossip becomes survival entertainment. Back at your longhouse, you duck through the low wooden door and pull it shut behind you. The smell hits again, smoke, wool, dung, milk, but it's home. A flickering oil lamp shows your brother bent over a wooden bowl, stirring something viscous and grayish. Breakfast, he mutters, as if apologizing to the air. You sit, stretch your aching back, and glance at the rafters where strips of fish already hang drying slowly. The preparations have begun. Every motion from here until snowfall is a gamble against starvation. And you're one slightly moldy cheese away from becoming winter trivia yourself. You'll watch families scythe, stack, and pray over every blade of grass as fodder becomes a life-or-death harvest. Out here in the low, wind-scraped valley, grass is gold, not metaphorical gold. Actual life-preserving bite-by-bite salvation for every sheep, cow, and goat you hope to still be naming come March. And this morning you're wielding a hand scythe so dull it could probably pass for a spoon in the dark. Your forearms already ache and the sun isn't even fully up. The haying season is narrow, ridiculously so. You get maybe 6-7 weeks to harvest if the summer's been kind. But when has the summer ever been kind in 12th century Iceland? One bad fog, 1 week of unseasonal rain, and everything's ruined. Wet grass molds fast. Molded hay kills sheep. And dead sheep, well, you can't milk regrets. You crouch low and start swinging. The grass gives way with a hissing noise like it's letting out one last sigh before it turns into winter fuel. You bind it with a twisted rope of dried sedge, tying it into a bundle that looks suspiciously like it won't make it through January. Multiply that bundle by a few hundred and maybe you've got a shot. There's a rhythm to it. Slice, gather, bind. Slice, gather, bind. Around you, the entire family is out in the fields. Even the old grandmother, hunched and barely 5 feet tall, is gathering stray stalks like they're runaways. This isn't quaint. It's critical. Every lost blade could mean one less day of milk come February. Romanticized hardship looks great in sagas, but it smells like sweat and desperation in real time. And hay doesn't grow just anywhere. You only get decent fodder in lowlands near water, which means frequent turf wars. Yes, literally turf over grazing zones. Iceland's medieval legal system even had rules about how close you could cut hay to a neighbor's boundary. 1 foot too far, and suddenly it's a thing, capital T, as in the Alþingi, Iceland's National Assembly, might need to weigh in. Historians still argue whether these disputes were truly about survival or just excellent excuses for passive-aggressive poetry. A quirky aside, some farms train dogs to help herd hay. Not carry it, obviously. They're dogs, not donkeys, but to guard it. Hay theft was that serious. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night because you heard someone sneaking off with an armful of grass. And then imagine sprinting barefoot across a frost-damp field to retrieve it. That's the level of petty you're operating on out here. By midday, your hands are blistered. The scythe handle has rubbed 2 red raw spots into your palm. Your nose is sunburned. Your eyes are dry, and your back sounds like it's full of twigs every time you stand up. But still, you keep going. Because no matter how much hay you think you need, it's never enough. There's always one more bundle to make. One more pile to stack into the barn's dark corner. The haystacks themselves are works of art. If you just dump it in a heap, it molds. If you pack it too tightly, it overheats. Too loosely, the wind takes it, So you pile it in conical mounds like little thatched huts, each one covered with sod or old cloth to protect from the elements. There's a moment just before twilight when the fields are dotted with these hay domes, glowing amber in the low sun, and for a second, it's beautiful. Then the wind shifts, and you smell the sheep again. Your little brother trips over a rake and lands face first in a pile of half-dry grass. Nobody helps him up because we all saw it coming. "Leave it," your father mutters, half smiling. "If he sleeps there tonight, he'll dry faster." By evening, the air is thick with midges, tiny buzzing tormentors sent straight from whatever afterlife Icelanders didn't want to end up in. You wave them away with your hat, swatting at invisible itches. Your neck is stiff, your feet are numb, and your stomach's been rumbling since lunch, which consisted of sour milk and something that may have once been barley. Still, there's a strange comfort in it. The work is honest, immediate. You know exactly what you're fighting for. And if you do it right, this field of grass turns into life in slow motion. Every sheep that munches a mouthful of your hay this winter, that's a tiny nod to the sweat you're dropping into this soil right now. Back in the longhouse, someone's already boiling whey and cleaning a vat for skyr. The barn smells like damp grass and relief. Your arms go limp as you fall onto a fur-covered bench, and for a moment, you swear you'll never lift anything again. Then someone mentions the second field, and you sigh so loudly the sheep raise their heads in alarm. Before freezers, Icelanders relied on warm manure beds and precise fermentation. Yes, you're standing in it. You wake up to the delightful aroma of, let's call it, earthy complexity. The longhouse is warm, and not just from the low fire crackling in the hearth. The animals tucked into one half of the building are radiating heat like slow-breathing furnaces, and beneath the floorboards where your feet rest, that, my friend, is a composting treasure trove of animal dung and hay, gently smoldering like nature's least glamorous heating system. This isn't some rustic accident. It's engineering. You might not have central heating, but you do have what's essentially a giant livestock-powered radiant floor system. In the deepest winter, this microclimate can keep milk from freezing, stave off frostbite, and critically help preserve certain types of food, like root vegetables and fermented goods, stored in barrels nearby. Who needs a refrigerator when you've got a composting sheep sauna? You stretch and rise, careful not to disturb the sheep huddled near the wall. One gives you the side eye as if daring you to steal its spot. You wouldn't. That part of the floor is prime real estate, extra warm, not too drafty. The only downside is the occasional steamy puff of gas. This winter, the phrase "sleep tight" hits differently. Stepping outside, the cold air slaps your cheeks like a schoolteacher, with no patience for whining. The contrast is immediate. Indoors, steamy barnyard funk. Outdoors, Arctic slap. Welcome to Iceland. Today's task is fermentation. That magical, terrifying in-between state where food becomes either life-giving nutrition or a new kind of monster. First on the agenda, sour whey, also known as misa. It's the leftover liquid from skyr making, and here it's a preservation miracle. You lug a wooden barrel filled with whey out from the shed. It sloshes with the tangy scent of forgotten gym socks and lemon. Into this you'll drop meat chunks of lamb or mutton, occasionally even bits of whale or bird, left to soak for weeks or months. The whey's acidity keeps bacteria at bay, supposedly. Historians still argue whether this method was genuinely safe or just tolerated because there weren't other options. You plug your nose and drop in the meat anyway. You'll know in February. Next, the manure bed. This part's a little niche. Some farmers, especially those farther inland where winter hit harder and supplies ran thinner, created heated fermentation beds using, you guessed it, animal dung. You walk to the shed where an old wooden trough rests, already filled with a mix of straw and manure that's been sitting for weeks. You stir it slowly, methodically. The warmth is undeniable. Steam rises from the middle. This isn't just for heating the room. Some people buried vegetables or even sealed containers of dairy in the bed using the mild heat to prevent freezing or over-fermentation. If you're thinking, wait, they kept food in poop, well, sort of. Wrapped, sealed, and carefully layered, yes. Touching the dung directly. No thanks, you're not that desperate. Yet. A fun fringe tidbit: some Icelanders believed the smell itself repelled evil spirits and sickness. So yes, somewhere along the line, smells like a goat exploded was rebranded as a protective charm. You can't help but laugh as you think about medieval ghosts gagging their way back into the afterlife. Back inside, your cousin is checking the pickle pit. That's not slang. It's an actual pit in the floor, dug deep enough to stay cool, year-round, lined with stones and filled with barrels of preserved vegetables and bits of fish. The key here is layers. Everything is packed tightly, underway, sealed with wax or tallow, and buried in the darkness. The wax comes from the occasional trade, or, if you're lucky, bees kept in makeshift hives wrapped in turf for warmth. Most folks just use animal fat. It's not elegant, but it's effective. You pry the lid off one barrel and a smell hits you like a philosophical question. Is it good? Is it evil? Is it ready? You taste it. It's chewy, a little sour, definitely fermented, possibly safe, probably. As you reseal the pit, you notice frost creeping across the inside of the longhouse windows. The season's closing in. The livestock are restless, pacing more than usual, grumbling in their sheepy way. That usually means snow within a week. There's one last prep job: insulating the stored milk. For this, you wrap clay pots in wool scraps and bury them in the warmest corner near the animal pens. The milk has already thickened into something halfway between yogurt and glue. By winter, it'll resemble cheese, sort of. You sigh. You didn't sign up to become a medieval food scientist. But here you are, stirring dung beds, measuring sourness, judging clumps by texture. And all of it so that 4 months from now, when the wind howls and the night lasts 18 hours, you'll have something, anything to eat. A final note before bed: one of the sheep just sneezed, loudly. You're not saying you're worried, but if it coughs tomorrow, you're naming it stew. It's slaughter season. Cue the boiling cauldron, sizzling fat, and someone trying to stuff blood into sheep intestines in the dark. The first frost has come. Not a casual, ooh, pretty white grass kind of frost, but the kind that makes your bones ache. The water buckets freeze, and the sheep huddle closer like they've been planning this cuddle pile all year. It also means the meat clock is ticking. Fast. Out here in medieval Iceland, there's no such thing as feeding your entire flock through the winter. You simply can't make enough hay. So you do what every farmer dreads, but absolutely depends on you: start thinning the herd. It's slaughter time. You wake up before dawn. The sky outside is a dull smear of blue, barely light. The men are already outside, sharpening knives with long, rasping strokes against worn stone. The women have the cauldrons heating, the fire already crackling under soot-blackened iron pots. Everything smells like wet wool and smoke and something about to bleed. Today's goal: process as many animals as you can before the daylight disappears, which in October means you've got about 6 hours max. the rest done by torchlight. And let's be honest, there's nothing quite like slicing a throat with frostbitten fingers by the light of burning sheep fat. You take the first sheep. She's older, not a good breeder anymore. You murmur something. It's not a prayer exactly, more like a quiet thank you disguised as efficiency. The knife does its job. The blood is collected in a wooden bowl, still steaming thick and deep red. You carry it carefully inside where your sister is already prepping the intestines. There's a pot of water boiling over the fire, and the smell in here is a blend of sharp iron boiling gut and desperation masked as tradition. Now comes the blood sausage. You take a funnel fashioned from horn and help pour the blood into the sheep intestines, which have been turned inside out and rinsed with whey. Your sister adds bits of barley, wild herbs, and even chopped fat. You tie the ends with twine made from twisted horsehair and hang the sausages near the hearth where the smoke curls upward like a lazy ghost. You want quirky? Here's one for the list. Some families would sing or hum while they worked, believing the meat would taste better if it was prepared with good vibrations. Not exactly science, but considering you're up to your elbows in sheep guts, a little singing doesn't sound so crazy. Meanwhile, outside, the butchering continues. Bones are split, marrow saved, offal sorted into what's edible, what's storable, and what can be boiled into a kind of lumpy, fatty soup base. You toss some into the Stockpit where it will be buried under cold stones and snow, essentially freezing itself until needed. And nothing goes to waste. Stomach linings cleaned and stuffed with blood and oats, ears charred and dried, tails boiled down for grease. Even the hooves are saved, later boiled until the connective tissue turns into gelatin, which you'll call jelly, and pretend it's dessert. Historians still argue whether these preservation methods were born from ingenuity or sheer starvation. But when you see a child licking dried lung like it's a lollipop, you start leaning toward both. A quick moment of levity. One of the younger boys tries to inflate a pig bladder like a balloon and nearly passes out. It sails through the air before landing in a pile of hay, scaring the chickens. Everyone laughs. It's the first laugh of the day, and it feels like gold. By afternoon, the courtyard looks like something out of a meat-themed fever dream. Carcasses hang from wooden frames, dripping fat into the dirt. Dogs loiter nearby, alert but wisely cautious. Ravens circle overhead, occasionally swooping down for a stray bit of skin or gristle. Inside, your grandmother is already boiling bones for broth. The entire longhouse now smells like a meat sauna. You're sweating through your wool tunic, but you don't dare open a door. Any heat loss means slower cooking, slower preserving, and colder toes tonight. Your cousin is scraping a cowhide, muttering about making shoes. Another relative is boiling sheep fat to make tallow candles. Every part of the animal has a purpose. Even the teeth get tossed into the fire sometimes, either as a superstition or a convenient way to not trip over a molar at midnight. And finally, the fat rendering. You take the last hunks of suet, those thick, waxy blocks from around the kidneys, and toss them into a pan. Slowly they melt, transforming into liquid fat that will solidify into precious cooking grease or lamp oil. You bottle it in clay pots, stoppered with cork, and sealed with beeswax, or more often a sheep's wool plug because you ran out of beeswax 2 years ago. Night falls early, pressing down like a heavy blanket soaked in silence. Outside, the hanging carcasses now glisten in the torchlight. You pause. There's something strangely peaceful about it. A job done, a necessity met, the cost counted in both blood and gratitude. You stretch your arms stiff and splattered and look at the rows of preserved food to be. It won't be enough, not yet. But it's a start. And in a few days, you'll do it all again. One more sheep looks at you from the far corner. You avoid eye contact. That one's still got a name. You help skin a seal with a dull knife, then bury its fat near a cold stream. What could possibly go wrong? The wind today is from the northeast, sharp and salt-bitten, which means one thing: the seals have returned to the rocks. That's good news if you're willing to do something about it. You bundle up thick wool layers over your already itchy tunic and head toward the coast, dragging a sled and trying not to think too hard about the smell that always clings to seal blubber. You'll be wearing it for days. Seals are not particularly easy prey. You crouch low among the rocks, eyes narrowed, heart thudding like a slow drum in your chest. When the moment is right, snap, you lunge forward with your harpoon, a sharpened iron point lashed to a wooden shaft. The seal squeals, then goes still. The others dive into the waves, vanishing like ghosts. You mutter a thank you under your breath and get to work. It's messy. The skin peels away reluctantly, and the blubber comes off in thick slabs, yellow-white, rubbery, and slick as melted soap. You're slipping, swearing, slicing with a blade that was last sharpened sometime in midsummer, but eventually you manage. The meat goes onto the sled, the skin gets rolled and lashed tight, and the fat, well, that's special. Seal blubber is prized not just for eating but for storage and trade. When rendered into oil, it burns slow and steady in a lamp. When raw, it's insulation, and when salted and buried in the right conditions, it becomes allegedly edible over time. You dig a hole near the edge of a cold stream, carefully lining the bottom with stones. The air here is a few degrees cooler than back at the longhouse. That matters. You lower the slabs of blubber into the hole, layering them with seaweed and a top covering of turf. It's like building a cake if the cake was designed to terrify your future self. Historians still argue whether this form of burial fermentation was traditional across Iceland or limited to coastal families with limited options. What's certain is this: it worked well enough to keep people alive, and poorly enough that even modern Icelanders joke about the trauma. You place a stone marker at the top, nothing fancy, just enough to remember which lump of earth not to walk across barefoot in spring. Back at the longhouse, your hands still smell like seal. You wash them in snowmelt, then rub them with a handful of sour whey. It helps. Slightly. You sit down near the hearth where the others are already trimming seal meat into strips for drying. You lay yours out over a net strung between rafters. The smoke from the hearth curls upward, slow and sticky, wrapping itself around the meat. Over the next few weeks, the air will cure it. The salt will harden it, and the fat will drip onto whatever unlucky soul sleeps on the bench below. Better hope that's not you. Want a quirky tidbit? Some Icelanders swore that seal fat cured sore throats. They'd cut a thin slice, warm it on a hot rock, and swallow it like a medicinal lozenge. Others swore it cured nothing but dignity. You're undecided. Later that evening, your aunt prepares a stew with chunks of seal meat, wild onions, and a dollop of fermented milk. The smell is polarizing, but when you taste it, it's surprisingly rich. Oily, yes, but hearty in a way that fills your ribs and makes your toes tingle with relief. You go back for seconds. You may even lick the bowl. No judgment here. Out on the sled, the seal skin is drying. Once fully cured, it'll be used to patch shoes, bind tool handles, or even stretched across a drum. nothing is wasted. The whiskers, some say they protect children from curses. The bones crushed into needles or burned for grease. And the blubber you buried. With any luck, you'll dig it up in January when the sea is frozen, the sheep are snoring in their sleep, and your cousin has lost a bet about eating whatever's under that rock. It's strange how much hope can be packed into a hole in the ground. But that's life here. Survival is just a series of edible gambles. You store fat under the soil, meat in the rafters, fish on racks, and somewhere deep in your chest the hope that this winter will be kinder than the last. As you drift off to sleep, the wind howls across the roof like it's testing the strength of your decisions. You pull the fur tighter and tell yourself the seal won't spoil. Probably. We grind barley between lava stones while lamenting its low yield and absurd price. It's basically medieval quinoa. It's one of those mornings where your breath fogs indoors. The longhouse hearth barely holds a glow, and your toes are having a passionate debate about whether they still exist. But no matter, the barley isn't going to grind itself. You groan your way out of your furs, wrap a shawl around your shoulders, and join your aunt at the quernstone. It's a squat, round setup, a fixed stone base with a second rotatable stone on top. Between them you pour handfuls of barley, slowly turning the top wheel with a wooden handle. The sound is something between a groan and a growl, a kind of grainy protest that perfectly matches your mood. Barley is the only cereal crop that stands a fighting chance in Iceland's stunted growing season. Wheat, forget it. Oats, maybe if you're very lucky and half a miracle occurs. But barley is hardy, and still the harvests are pitiful. You get barely enough to justify the back-breaking labor of tilling, planting, weeding, and reaping. And that's before the drying, threshing, and storing. Each handful you pour into the quern took weeks to grow and hours to prepare. That makes this grinding task sacred in its own way, even if your shoulders scream otherwise. You pause to brush flour from your hands. It clings like fine snow, soft and pale against your skin. The resulting barley flour won't rise much, there's no yeast after all, but it makes passable flatbread. You'll mix it with sour whey or old milk, maybe sprinkle in some crushed herbs or dried fish bits if you're feeling fancy. Barley isn't just food, it's currency. You measure debts in it, settle small disputes with it, and offer it as tribute to chieftains or traveling lawmen. Which means spilling it is not just annoying, it's financially tragic. Your cousin did that once. The silence afterward was more intense than any family feud. Want a weird historical tidbit? Some households stored their barley not in sacks, but in dried animal stomachs, nature's waterproof, rodent-resistant containers. Imagine scooping your flour from a sheep belly. There's a sentence you didn't expect today. The grains you're grinding were probably imported as seed from Norway. Iceland's soil isn't exactly prime farmland, too rocky, too acidic, too frost-prone. That's why your family rotates planting plots, leaving one to rest each season. Even then, success isn't guaranteed. A cold snap in early summer or a rogue sheep with boundary issues can undo months of work. Historians still argue whether barley farming in Iceland was economically wise or just a desperate attempt to cling to a European identity. You think it's both. Sure, it costs too much labor for too little payoff, but having bread even the dense, chew-like-you-mean-it kind is psychological gold. After several hours, you've ground enough flour for 3 loaves. Your aunt mixes it with whey and rolls the dough into rough discs. No ovens here, just a hot slab of stone set over coals. The bread hisses as it hits, and a sour, sweet scent fills the air, cutting through the animal musk and wood smoke. You nibble a piece still warm. It's dense, chewy, slightly sour, and absolutely heavenly. Add a smear of skyr and a sliver of dried mutton, and you might even call it a delicacy, or at least edible with flair. Barley has other uses too. Your uncle's got a secret stash fermenting in a hide-lined vat out back. Technically, it's for making vinegar. Realistically, it's for making something that might pass for beer on a very lonely evening. The smell wafting from that vat is assertive and possibly illegal, depending on what century you ask. You help bag the remaining flour in a linen sack and carry it to the storehouse, a separate turf-covered shed half sunk into the earth. It's cool inside, perfect for keeping moisture out. You stack the sack next to a dwindling supply of dried fish and a worryingly empty cheese shelf. Winter inventory is becoming very real. The chickens cluck as you walk past. You toss them a pinch of cracked barley, which they devour like it's treasure. One hops up and poops directly into your boot. You stare at it in silent betrayal, farming where even your food judges you. Later that night, your father sharpens a sickle in the corner, mumbling about next spring. You listen absently, turning a barley cake in your hands. It's rough-edged, uneven, nothing like the loaves you imagine in French monasteries or English castles. But it's yours, grown on this rock ground by your hands, baked in your fire. Tomorrow you'll ration it out, some for eating, some for trade, and some for the inevitable surprise guest who arrives mid-blizzard. Because if there's one rule out here harsher than the wind, it's this: no one eats alone when the snow is falling. Salt was rare, so food preservation involved way, smoke, wind, and pure stubbornness. Some say rot was a flavor. You'd kill for a pinch of salt. Just a pinch. Not even the fancy flakes, just enough to season the fish, so it doesn't taste like regret. But here in medieval Iceland, salt is luxury, not a pantry staple. It's expensive to import brutal to produce locally, and save for the rarest of occasions, like curing meat for a chieftain, or flavoring the one soup you serve guests, when you want them to think you're rich. So instead, you rely on preservation methods that dance on the edge of fermentation and controlled rot. Because if it can't last the winter, it might as well have never existed. This morning, you're in charge of the smokehouse. It's a low, narrow turf building behind the longhouse, its entrance blackened by soot and years of use. Inside, the air is thick and heavy with smoke, not just from burning wood, but from dried dung and driftwood, both favored for their slow-burning, cold-smoking properties. It doesn't matter what's on the menu, meat, fish, even slabs of cheese, all of it goes in here. You duck your head and enter. Visibility drops to 3 feet. The air tastes like an old fire trying to apologize. Hanging above are rows of fish, their skin taut and shiny, dangling from strings looped over rough beams. A few haunches of lamb hang near the center, dripping ever so slightly into the ash pit below. You add more fuel to the fire, not too much. This is a cold smoke, low heat, long hours. You want the food dry, not cooked. It'll stay here for days, sometimes weeks, until it hardens, darkens, and develops that uniquely Icelandic flavor profile, half smoke, half snowstorm. Some folks joke that it's like eating memory foam soaked in fireplace tea. Others swear the smoke brings out the soul of the meat. You just know it doesn't spoil. Usually, outside, the wind howls, scattering ash through the doorway and making the meat dance slightly on its hooks. You check the seals, turf blocks wedged into cracks in the wall, and adjust a flap of sheepskin over the door. Everything in here matters. One loose board and a week's worth of fish is suddenly a buffet for foxes. Smoke alone doesn't preserve everything, so you move to the secondary strategy way. Remember the liquid left over from making skyr, that thin, sour, lemony stuff that looks like cloudy vinegar? You store it in wooden barrels and drop food into it to sour or ferment over weeks. The acidity is just high enough to kill off the worst bacteria, and the result is controversial. You pull out a small leg of lamb from the weigh barrel, wrap it in linen, and hang it in the wind for final drying. The meat is firm, tangy, and smells like something between yogurt and an old boot. But it lasts, months even. Historians still argue whether this was done for flavor or just as a grim necessity. The truth probably lies somewhere between desperation and indifference. You try a bite. It's chewy, slightly fizzy. Your cousin raises an eyebrow, waiting for your reaction. You nod. Not terrible, you say, which in this world is a 5-star review. Then there's wind drying. Some days when the sun decides to show its face and the air dries out just enough, you haul racks of fish and meat outside. You lean them against the longhouse elevated on poles so dogs and children don't steal from the bottom row. The wind here isn't gentle. It rips through the valley like it's chasing someone, drying everything in its path. You have to be quick. Too much wind and the food tears from the rack and blows down the hill. Not enough and mold sets in. There's a moment of perfect dryness, maybe 4 hours long, when everything crisps just right. You live for those moments. You schedule your week around them. A quirky tradition. Some households hang a carved charm, usually a wooden fish or bird, on the drying rack to watch over the food. It's not magic exactly, more like a passive-aggressive insurance policy. If the food goes missing, you blame the charm for not doing its job. You hang up today's batch and squint at the sky. Clouds gathering. Might be snow by nightfall. You whisper a prayer to the wind, not for help, just for mercy. Back in the longhouse, someone's boiling down yesterday's whey into a thick, concentrated sludge. This version lasts even longer and can be painted onto dried food as an extra barrier. Its glossy smells like expired lemon milk and works surprisingly well. You dip a strip of dried fish into it and hang it by the fire. One of the children walks by, pinches their nose, and mutters something about smelly ghosts. You smile. The ghosts at least are quiet. Later you inventory the storehouse: smoked lamb, wind-dried cod, whey-cured sausages. It's not much, but it's something. And every piece was fought for, smoked, salted, or soured into stubborn survival. A final note. Some folks swear the worst-smelling food lasts the longest. Not a scientific fact, but at this point your nose is no longer part of the decision-making process. Your gut makes the call. And for now, it's silent, which is probably a good sign. You choke down hardfish, rotted Greenland shark, as villagers insist it grows on you like guilt or moss. You were warned, everyone warned you, but you still took the dare. It started this morning when Jan, the neighbor who always smells faintly of fish and trouble, sauntered over with a wooden tray and that grin people wear right before a prank. "You haven't really faced winter until you've had hardfish," he said, lifting the cloth. There it was, a few pale rubbery cubes of what looked like gelatinized soap. The smell hit you before your eyes even registered what it was: ammonia, sharp sour with a faint undertone of something dead that maybe asked to be left alone. Hardfish, Greenland shark buried in gravelly sand for weeks or months, then hung to dry in a shack open to the wind and the judgment of crows. It is not for the faint-hearted, or, frankly, the sensible. You've heard the lore. Greenland shark meat is toxic when fresh loaded with trimethylamine oxide, a mouthful that might as well mean instant regret. But ferment it, dry it, pray over it, and eventually it becomes edible. Allegedly. Historians still argue whether this process was a lucky accident or an act of desperation. One theory says someone once buried a dead shark to dispose of it, forgot about it, dug it up weeks later, and possibly drunk, took a bite. Another suggests it was deliberate experimentation by people with no salt and too much curiosity. You sit across from John, who pops a cube into his mouth like it's a boiled sweet. Chew slowly, he advises. You do. Big mistake. The taste is aggressive. It hits in waves first, a kind of sourness that reminds you of spoiled milk and cold iron. Then the ammonia burns your sinuses, clears your throat, and leaves your eyes watering. By the third chew, it's no longer food, it's a challenge. You manage to swallow without gagging. Barely. Your cousin claps. Someone cheers sarcastically. You may never be the same again. The shark, of course, isn't local. It's a rare catch, usually brought in by coastal fishers, with the gear and guts to drag one from deep, icy waters. And when you get one, you can't eat it fresh. You have to cure it. Here's how you gut the shark: clean it, if you're polite, and bury it in gravel or sand under heavy stones. The pressure squeezes out fluids. The cold ground slows rot. After 6 to 12 weeks, you dig it up, cut it into strips, and hang it to dry for several more months. You don't taste it during the process. That would be madness. A quirky aside, in some fishing villages, Karl, drying huts had names jokingly referred to as the stink parlor, or where angels weep. Teenagers dared each other to stand inside for 5 minutes. Most lost. You help hang this season's batch in a drying shed downwind from the longhouse. The wind whistles through the slats, stirring the hanging strips like pale flags of stubborn pride. The shack smells like someone mopped a butcher shop with ammonia, and yet here it is, food for winter. The meat hardens as it dries, forming a rubbery outer layer and a jelly-like core. When ready, it's cut into cubes and stored in sealed barrels or linen sacks, often sprinkled with ash to deter pests. Not that many pests are interested, to be honest. You return home with your prize, a small pouch of the foulest thing you've ever willingly carried, and tuck it into the cold pantry corner beside the smoked fish and whey barrel. Your aunt raises an eyebrow. You ate it? She asks. You nod solemnly. She just pats your shoulder. You'll make it through winter. Later, someone lights an oil lamp near the pantry, and for a horrifying moment, the heat coaxes the shark smell into the room like it's been summoned. You throw a cloth over the bag and mutter something that might be a warning to future generations. And yet there's a strange pride in having tasted it, like a badge of survival. You've joined the club of people who voluntarily fermented poison into dinner. Before bed, you check the drying hut one more time. The shark strips flap gently in the moonlight, dancing to the rhythm of the wind and the unspoken truth of Icelandic cuisine. If it doesn't kill you, it probably makes you stronger, or at least harder to surprise at dinner. You stir curds by torchlight and learn that this protein-packed yogurt survived plagues, kings, and picky toddlers. The fire's low tonight, but the skyr must be stirred. You kneel by the hearth, a clay pot nestled between your knees. a wooden spoon in your hand, and a smell hovering somewhere between sour milk and sweet bread dough. In the flickering firelight, the curds shimmer thick, pale, barely trembling as you stir them in slow, lazy circles. It's quiet, peaceful, a rare pause in the frantic winter prep. Skyr is comfort food, survival food, the kind of thing you can serve to your grandmother, your child, or a visiting trader and not feel ashamed. It's soft, tangy, and packed with protein. It's also one of the few things in your life that doesn't try to stab, bite, spoil, or freeze. It just sets. Technically speaking, skyr is a fresh cheese strained and cultured, not aged. But culturally, it's more like a yogurt, a thick, rich, slightly sour miracle born from cow's milk and patience. And it's been made in Iceland for centuries, possibly even since the first Norse settlers arrived with livestock and very low expectations for dessert. Your batch started 2 days ago when the morning milking gave more than expected. You poured the warm milk into a pot and added a dollop of old skyr from the last batch, a mother culture, if you will. Then you left it to sit near the fire, letting natural bacteria do their quiet, unseen work. Now the curds are forming beautifully. You ladle them into a cloth-lined basket to drain overnight. The whey trickles out slowly, dripping into a clay bowl where it'll be saved for sour preservation or given to the pigs. Waste nothing, not even the sour tears of cheese. A quirky historical aside, some families whispered blessings over their skyr batches to keep the curds from weeping too much. Others stuck iron nails in the windowsill nearby to scare away food spirits. You've done both. It can't hurt. As you hang the skyr to drain, you glance at the shelf where last week's batch rests. It's wrapped in linen and tucked into a wooden box. Cool, dry, safe. You open it. The smell is sharper now, aged just enough to make your nose wrinkle, but still undeniably edible. You scoop out a spoonful. Smooth, tangy, a little salty. Comfort in a bowl. Skyr was more than a snack in medieval Iceland. It was medicine, currency, and social glue. A sick child, feed them warm skyr. A visiting cousin serves skyr with a drizzle of honey if you're fancy, or some crushed barley if you're real. A bride's dowry. Skyr might be on the list. It was even traded at the Althingi, Iceland's great assembly, where chieftains and farmers swapped jars of it beside more serious legal matters. Historians still argue whether Icelandic Skyire descended directly from Norse traditions or evolved independently from local experimentation. What's certain, it stayed. Empires rose and fell. Iceland got colder, then colder again, and yet Skyr endured. Through volcanic winters, shipwrecked summers, and long months where the only spice was sarcasm. Back at the hearth, your cousin sneaking spoonfuls from the still warm batch. You wave him off, but he grins with curds in his teeth. Just testing, he says, for poison. Classic. Later that night, your grandmother takes a bowl of skyr to her bed. She stirs in a spoonful of melted tallow and a pinch of dried crowberries, one of the only fruits hardy enough to survive here. She eats slowly, each bite a kind of ritual. This will keep me through, she murmurs. You sit beside her, your own bowl cooling in your lap. The fire crackles low, the wind rattles the turf roof, but the skyr at least is warm. Tomorrow you'll seal the new batch into jars, stash them in the cellar, and trade a few for fish or barley. One might even go to the old man who swears your skyr cured his backache. You know it didn't, but he pays in smoked mutton, so who's arguing? As you lick the last curds from your spoon, you realize something strange. In a world full of preserved rot, buried fish, and boiling hooves, this one food feels gentle, familiar, like it belongs. And maybe that's what makes Skyire special. It's not just food, it's proof that even in a land built on lava and ice, something soft can thrive. This morning your boat nearly capsized catching cod, but hey, dried fish might save your life in March. The sea is angry. That's the first thing you notice when you step out into the biting dawn wind, your breath fogging your beard, already stiffening with salt-laced air. The second thing, your fingers are going to hate you before this day is done. But the cod are running, and when the cod are running, you don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect weather. You and 3 others push the rowboat out through the brackish shorebreak, cursing the cold, the waves and the rocks that seem to shift closer every year. The boat is low and narrow, made of pine boards fastened with iron nails and prayers. You grip the oars with numb hands and row until your arms shake past the kelp line into deeper water where the fish gather. Cod don't announce themselves. They're quiet, blunt creatures swimming in cold schools through pitch-dark water. But once your line goes taut and the weight starts pulling back, you know it's real. You haul the first one in. It flops in the bottom of the boat with a sound like a wet boot hitting a wall. More follow. Your fingers burn from the icy water every time you reach down to pull the catch free. The waves slap against the hull, soaking your knees. You taste blood, just a cracked lip, but it adds to the mood. Then comes the rogue wave. It slaps the boat sideways hard enough to send one man sprawling and another's knife skittering across the planks. You all freeze for a heartbeat, arms out like scarecrows, bracing against what might come next. But the boat holds. Barely. You row harder, faster, because you know this sea is always a breath away from becoming your grave. By midday you return to shore soaked and shaking, but with a boatload of cod. Dozens of them, big, wide-jawed, staring at you with dead eyes that still judge your rowing technique. Now the real work begins. You string the fish up near the longhouse, gutting each one with a rhythm born of necessity. Slit the belly, scoop the guts, slice the gills, salt. If you have it, though, most of the time you don't. Instead, you rely on the cold wind to pull moisture from the meat, leaving behind something dry, light, and shockingly durable. It's called hardfish, and it's going to be breakfast, lunch, and dinner more times than you'd like to think about. Want a quirky fact? Some Icelanders still eat hardfish today, gnawing it like jerky and dipping it in butter. Back in your time, there was no butter, just strong teeth and lower expectations. Historians still argue how central cod fishing was to Icelandic survival in the medieval period. Some believe it became the backbone of trade, not just sustenance. Others argue sheep and skyr were more culturally defining. But today, holding a full net of cold, slick fish and knowing it might feed your family for a month, there's no argument in your heart. You stack the cleaned fish onto drying racks, wooden frames arranged in rows downwind of the latrine hut, because nothing wants to hang out near the latrine. The wind is sharp, steady, perfect. In a few weeks, the fish will be stiff as driftwood, each one able to last months without refrigeration, or longer if you're very, very desperate. Your hands are bleeding by now, just little nicks enough to sting with every splash of salt air. Your sister wraps a strip of old wool around your thumb and tells you to stop whining. You point out that she hasn't pulled fish guts out of her sleeve yet today. She responds by smacking you with a cod tail. Fair enough. Inside, your grandmother already has a pot boiling with fish bones, dried herbs, and a scrap of barley. The smell is sharp but rich, exactly what you'll need in February when the nights stretch so long they feel permanent. You tuck a bundle of dried cod into a linen sack, tie it tight with twine, and store it in the cold corner of the pantry. You press a hand to it before you leave. It's a silly habit, like patting a lucky stone, but you do it every time. That night at supper, you chew dried cod slowly. It's tough, salty, and chewy to the point of becoming existential, but it's filling. And when you pair it with a dollop of skyr and a mouthful of sour whey, it becomes something close to a balanced meal. You fall asleep still smelling of the sea, your hair stiff with brine. The wind hisses through the turf walls like a tired fisherman, and outside the fish keep drying, waiting, becoming more than just food, their insurance, 1,000 bites of hope against the long winter. You hang fish on a rack and hope for wind too much, and it tears your net, too little, and it molds. The sky is dull this morning, gray but not threatening, just the kind of blank, undecided weather that makes you uneasy. You step out with a bundle of cleaned fish cradled against your chest, ducking as a gust pulls your hood sideways. Today's goal is simple drying, or more accurately, not spoiling. You walk past the usual rack, 2 tall wooden posts with crossbeams, a net of thick twine stretched between like a spider web, built by someone with very cold hands. This rack is your best chance at turning fresh fish into hardfish, but only if the wind cooperates. And lately the wind's been moody. You hang the fish, one by one, slipping their tails through loops in the netting, careful not to place them too close together. Air must move freely between each one, or mold creeps in silent and green. You learned that the hard way last year, 20 fish wasted because your little brother packed them too tightly trying to save space. He still hasn't lived it down. Today the breeze is light but steady. Good. You say a quiet word of encouragement to the wind anyway because you're not taking chances. In Iceland, the wind is a character all its own, capricious, vicious, sometimes strangely helpful. It's dried your meat, aired your linen, and once knocked your cousin into a pile of goat dung. That last one might have been personal. The process of drying is almost an art. Too much sun and the fish cook instead of drying. Too much humidity and they rot. No wind and you might as well just feed them to the chickens. But when it's just right, the fish firm up over a week or two, becoming leathery on the outside, light as driftwood, and tough enough to survive the apocalypse. You rotate a few of the racks, adjusting their angle with wooden pegs to catch more air. A cloud passes overhead. The light dims. A moment later, the wind stops. You freeze. No movement. The fish hang limp. The air turns heavy. You sniff once, paranoia. Maybe, or maybe that faint whiff of damp cloth and something sour is your warning. Without wind, everything slows. Spoilage doesn't scream, it sneaks. You grab your cousin and tell him to build a small fire nearby, not to cook, but to create smoke. It won't dry the fish directly, but the heat will keep the air moving, discourage flies, and mask the scent just enough to buy time. He grumbles but obeys, stacking twigs and blowing into the flame with all the enthusiasm of someone denied lunch. While he works, you reposition the racks, moving them closer to the shed wall, where the wind tends to pick up when it returns. You hum to yourself one of those wordless, half-forgotten songs your grandmother used to sing. It helps pass the time and maybe, just maybe, keeps the mold spirits at bay. Superstition, sure, but again, you're not taking chances. A quirky aside, some folks carve tiny runes into their drying racks for protection. Others paint the wood with sour whey or a thin layer of ash. You once met a man who claimed talking to the fish while they dried made them last longer. He may have been sleep-deprived or onto something. Historians still argue whether wind drying was more effective than smoke curing, or if the methods were used interchangeably. In truth, you use whatever works. On bad days, you do both. On worse days, you just pray. The wind returns by afternoon, just a whisper, then stronger. The fish sway gently, and you let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Saved for now, you check each one, fingers brushing over the skin, noting which ones are firming up and which still feel questionable. Your little brother brings a bowl of curds and a chunk of barley bread. "You forgot lunch," he says. You realize it's mid-afternoon and your stomach has been growling for an hour. You take the food and sit on a barrel, watching the fish twist in the breeze like strange flags of survival. That night, you bring the racks inside the smokehouse just in case the wind turns stormy. You've lost racks before, torn nets, snapped posts, fish scattered like debris across the mud. Once a dog got into the pile. You don't talk about that day. You hang the fish from rafters inside, letting the heat from the low fire keep the worst of the damp away. The room smells like salt smoke and faint desperation. You sit on a stool and stare at the hanging fish. They're not beautiful, but they mean you'll make it another month. And that's enough. Before bed, you check the netting. Tight, no frays. You whisper thanks to the wind anyway, because superstition or not, it listened today. And maybe tomorrow it won't. You sip sour milk thick as jelly and realize it's the medieval equivalent of probiotics and mild depression. The jug hits the table with a heavy thunk. You already know what's inside. It's the same thing that was in there yesterday and the day before and probably last year, if your memory is right. Sour milk, thick, tangy, more solid than liquid at this point. It clings to the inside of the clay like it's afraid to come out. And honestly, you're afraid to coax it. You give it a swirl. It doesn't slosh. It lurches. Still, you grab a wooden cup, scoop some in, and take a sip. It's cold, puckering, halfway between buttermilk and curdled regret. But it fills your stomach, and more importantly, it doesn't kill you. In medieval Iceland, that's practically a 5-star review. This sour milk, called skyr, is a cornerstone of your winter diet. When fresh milk goes bad, which it will, and fast if not consumed immediately, you don't cry over it. You celebrate it. Kind of. The natural fermentation process turns it into something tangy, thick, and long-lasting. Not quite cheese, not quite yogurt, but definitely a dairy product with opinions. It's usually stored in clay jugs or wooden casks, sealed with wool or lard, and kept in the coldest part of the house, or better yet, buried in the ground. A cold, sour milk pit. Sounds appetizing, doesn't it? You dip a piece of barley bread into it. The bread sags slightly, absorbing the tang. You chew slowly. It tastes honest. Not good exactly, but honest. You're feeding your body, not your dreams. A quirky fact. Some families used sour milk as a cleaning agent. Yes, really. The acid in it could strip grime off tools or make wool slightly softer. In a pinch, you could even use it to wash wounds, though the sting is not recommended unless you're already screaming for other reasons. Your grandmother swears by it, drinks a cup every morning with a raw onion. Cleans the blood, she says, though no one's quite sure what that means. She's 78 and still carries hay bales, so no one questions it either. You pour yourself another cup, The texture is somewhere between pudding and plaster, but your gut happy-ish. You haven't been sick all winter and you're pretty sure the sour milk is part of the reason. Between this skyr and the fermented shark, you still regret tasting your digestive system could probably survive a volcanic eruption. Historians still argue whether the prominence of fermented dairy in Icelandic cuisine came from scarcity or preference. Was it a cultural love of sour flavors, or just the fact that milk spoiled fast and people hate wasting food? The answer's probably both. You'd like to think it started with one brave soul sniffing a jug, shrugging, and deciding to roll the dice. You carry a jug of the stuff outside to the shed where it'll stay just cool enough to slow the fermentation. Too cold and it freezes into milky ice bricks. Too warm and it turns into something even the pigs won't eat. One winter the sour milk fermented so hard it exploded. The lid popped clean off the cask, splattering the ceiling with a curd confetti. No one cleaned it for days. Your sister claimed it smelled like revenge. Your uncle just called it vintage. You return to the longhouse, setting the jug near the fire for tomorrow's breakfast. It's a ritual now. The way some people brew coffee or steep tea, you ferment milk and swirl it with the confidence of someone who knows it probably won't bite back. A moment of levity. One of the goats got into a leftover bowl of sour last week and promptly fainted. You don't know if it was the taste or the existential shock of fermented dairy, but now the goat avoids the kitchen entirely. Probably wise. You sit by the fire, cup in hand, and sip again. The tang clings to your teeth. The aftertaste could strip paint, but it sits warm in your belly, filling you with a quiet kind of satisfaction. There's no sugar, no fruit, no fancy additions. Just milk time and survival instincts passed down for generations. This is food made by necessity, not romance. Yet somehow it's grown on you, like a habit, or moss. Outside the wind howls, the shutters rattle, and your stomach solid as stone. You calculate airflow in a turf-roofed hut filled with smoldering dung and suspended meat, a literal smoke test. The smell hits before the door even opens. It's not unpleasant, well, not entirely. It's earthy, thick, clinging, a blend of wet wool, peat, dried blood, and smoke with just a hint of what your cousin calls barnyard elegance. This, as you know by now, is the meat house, specifically your family's smoking hut. You duck inside, the doorways low to keep heat in and incidentally to test your posture. You nearly smack your head on the beam again. The interior is dim, lit only by the glow of a few embers cradled in a small pit in the floor. Above you, meat, rows of it strung up on crossbeams like a fleshy chandelier, lamb shoulders, strips of mutton, a few dubious sausage links, and something that may or may not have been a goose. And here's the tricky part, getting the airflow right. Too much air and the fire flares up, cooking instead of curing. Too little and the smoke stagnates, making everything taste like damp sadness. You squat next to the hearth, stirring the embers with a stick. You add a bit of dried sheep dung, cleaned of course, and a few chips of driftwood. The smoke rises in lazy tendrils. This isn't fast food, this is slow magic. You run your hand along the wall, checking for warmth. The turf holds it in well. These huts are engineering marvels disguised as dirt piles. The roof is thick with sod weighed down with stones to keep the wind from lifting it. The walls are layered stone base, wooden support, turf, outer skin. Each element plays a part in keeping the space dry and just warm enough for slow preservation. You shift a hanging haunch of lamb, letting the smoke hit it from a new angle. A small puddle of yellowish fat drops into the fire, sizzles, and sends up a puff of what can only be described as aromatic dread. You cough. The meat, however, glistens slightly in approval. A quirky tidbit. Some families used sheep's wool as a filter, hanging loose clumps from the rafters to absorb excess smoke and prevent soot from collecting directly on the meat. You've seen it done with varying degrees of success. One time the wool caught fire. That was a very exciting afternoon. Historians still argue whether these smokehouses followed consistent designs or were improvised from household to household. You've seen them as round huts, low lean-tos, even shared chambers with the livestock. Here, though, it's a freestanding structure, a place of honor and necessity. You check the fire again, then wedge a small flat stone under the door to allow a sliver of draft. Smoke starts to roll across the roofline, curling like lazy fingers above your head. Perfect. You sit back momentarily satisfied and breathe it in. Okay, maybe not too deep. One of the sausages bursts, popping like a small balloon. You sigh. Someone didn't prick the casing enough. Probably your cousin. You'll lecture him later. You record a mental inventory of what's here: 4 lamb legs, 6 fish, 2 haunches, 3 ropes of sausage, and a tray of marrow bones. You turn the bones gently. They'll go from soft and greasy to hard and dry, perfect for cracking open come midwinter. A good marrow soup warms more than your stomach. It earns you peace at the family table. You exit briefly to stretch your back. Outside, the snow has started. Just a dusting for now. You pull your shawl tighter and glance at the chimney hole above the hut. A perfect plume of smoke is escaping, trailing toward the gray sky. Beautiful. It means the flow inside is stable. The meat's getting its dose of preservative charm. You re-enter the hut to hang the final item, a small string of dried fish fins. These aren't for eating, they're for trade, or maybe to humor the neighbor who swears they prevent toothaches. He's missing 3 teeth, so maybe don't follow that advice too closely. Before you leave, you run your fingers across one of the lamb legs. The skin is drying, firm, not too brittle. You tap it. It thuds, a good thud. A will survive February thud. You close the door gently, wedging a stone at the base for airflow. Inside, the meat hangs quietly in its fragrant fog, slowly becoming something tougher, safer, longer lasting. You smile. There's no glamour in it, but there's something deeply satisfying in knowing your calculations, fire, size, draft angle, moisture levels, are the difference between sustenance and waste, between survival and spoiled meat. Back in the longhouse, your clothes reek of smoke and dung. Your sister pinches her nose and calls you roast goat. You bow with mock elegance. You don't mind the smell. It smells like winter insurance, like protein with a plan. Nothing is wasted: crushed bones, boiled hooves, roasted marrow. Your winter soup is one anatomy class away from sentience. It's soup day, which in medieval Iceland means it's throw everything vaguely edible into a pot and see what happens day. The smell hits you before the sun fully rises, rich, fatty, slightly metallic. You already know the ingredients without asking: bones, hooves, maybe a chunk of questionable sausage, and a prayer that someone remembered to skim off the hair. You roll out of your furs and wander toward the hearth, where your aunt is already poking at the cauldron with a ladle roughly the size of your head. Needs more hoof, she mutters. Right, of course. You grab a sack from the pantry corner. Inside are the week's collected leftovers. Split bones, scraped joints, brittle hooves that no one had the courage or dentistry to bite through. These are your gold now. You dump the pile on the table and the clatter echoes through the longhouse like someone dropping a bag of regrets. The work begins. Bones get cracked open with a hammerstone, one sharp strike, and the rich marrow inside spills out like ancient butter. You scoop it with a carved spoon and drop it into the soup, watching it dissolve into silky slickness. Marrow is pure survival fuel. Your grandmother calls it bone honey, which sounds sweet until you remember it came from a femur. The hooves go in next after a good boiling to loosen the outer layers. They'll simmer for hours, releasing gelatin that thickens the broth into a substance somewhere between stew and paste. It coats your teeth, your throat, your future. It sticks with you in every sense. A quirky tidbit. Some Icelanders believed hoof broth strengthened the joints. Drink enough of it and you'd walk like a mountain goat. Given how many elderly villagers limp anyway, the science may have been optimistic, but the tradition unshakable. Historians still argue whether bone soup was a deliberate culinary invention or just the natural result of desperation. Either way, it became a staple. One pot could feed a family for days, especially when stretched with barley, onions, or the occasional stolen turnip. You stir the pot, watching as the cloudy broth turns golden and thick. A layer of fat forms at the top, liquid insulation. You skim some into a smaller jar where it'll cool into a spreadable paste. This will go on bread tomorrow, or into someone's hair if the children get ideas again. The children, by the way, are already arguing over who gets the biggest marrow chunk. You promise to divide it fairly, which in this house means pretending not to notice when your brother sneaks the best piece later tonight. You taste the broth. Hot, rich, slightly sour. Someone definitely added whey. You add a handful of dried herbs, mostly for aroma. No one really cares what kind. If it grows, it goes in. There's a moment as you sit by the fire sipping your bowl where time stretches. The wind howls outside. Snow taps against the shutters like a bored ghost. But inside there's heat, heaviness, the kind of fullness that lingers in your bones long after the bowl is empty. You dip bread into the broth. It sags, then melts on your tongue. Not elegant, not light, but solid, comforting. A meal that feels like it's fighting off winter from the inside out. Later, you help strain the leftovers. Bits of bone go to the dogs. Sludge from the bottom of the pot gets scooped into a clay jar and stored for thickening future stews. Even the leftover hooves, now soft and jelly-like, get pressed into a mold to make a kind of jiggly ration. You call it hoof jelly. No one pretends it's good, but when food runs low, no one complains. You clean the pot with a rag soaked in whey and ash. The steam from the hearth curls around your hands, carrying the scent of fat and smoke and effort. You scrub until the metal shines, well, glows dully. That's good enough. As the evening sets in, you pour the last of the soup into wooden bowls for the family. Everyone eats in silence. Not from solemnity, just from the kind of gratitude that doesn't need to be spoken. This food isn't just nourishment. It's a declaration we made something out of nothing. Again. Your cousin raises a spoon and clinks it against his bowl. To bones, he says. To hooves, someone else adds. You smile and raise your spoon. To jelly that jiggles like a terrified goat. Laughter warms the room. Outside, the storm thickens. But inside, you've boiled down another piece of survival. One bone at a time. You roll cheese wheels into caves for storage and hope the cow burps. Don't spoil the batch seriously, methane matters. It's cave day. You and your brother are heaving a pair of damp cheese wheels onto a sled, strapping them down with rope that smells like seaweed and wet wool. The wheels are heavy, dense, round blocks of sour-smelling potential. Not quite hard enough to be shelf-stable, not soft enough to enjoy yet. Just the in-between kind of cheese that needs a special touch, time, cool air, and a complete absence of cow farts. You drag the sled up the hillside path, boots slipping on ice-glazed moss. The wind tugs at your hood like a disapproving elder. Behind you, the longhouse is shrinking into the fog, and ahead, the mouth of a shallow cave carved into basalt centuries ago. It's dark, damp, and smells faintly of moss ash, and 1,000 years of hopes that cheese wouldn't mold into sentient fungus. This is where the magic or madness happens. You duck inside, leading the sled into the gloom. The walls are slick with condensation. The ceiling is low. Somewhere in the back, last season's wheels rest on stone slabs aging slowly. You nudge one with your boot, still firm, still whole, still edible, assuming you can ignore the greenish halo blooming around the rind. Cheese, like most things in your life, is a gamble. You unload the new wheels, setting them gently apart from the older stock. Each one is wrapped in cloth, smeared with a layer of sour whey or ash to discourage mold and pests. And here's where things get scientific, or at least as scientific as you can be, while crouching in a mossy cave with a torch in your teeth. Airflow matters. Too much and the cheese dries out. Too little and it sweats. And cheese sweat, for the record, is real and horrifying. You adjust the wooden slats beneath the wheels to ensure air can pass underneath, then wedge a stone near the cave's mouth to keep the wind moving in the right direction. Here's the kicker. You also have to consider methane. Your cows, bless their wide-eyed innocence, produce a fair bit of gas. If you're aging cheese anywhere near the barn or even storing the wheels too close to where the animals bed down, you risk exposing the aging process to methane-rich air. Some swear it gives the cheese a riper character. Others claim it just makes it taste like regret. A quirky fact. One farmer once tried aging cheese in a sealed barrel near the sheep pen. It came out green, spongy, and reportedly hissed when cut. They called it the cursed wheel. No one knows what happened to it, or to the farmer's sense of smell. Historians still debate whether these cheese caves were deliberately constructed or simply repurposed natural shelters. Some believe they were sites of ritual or seasonal storage. Others think people just got tired of hauling milk-soaked bundles back and forth and picked the nearest shady hole. Either way, your families used this cave for generations, and each new wheel that joins the aging process is a kind of quiet promise we'll still be here in 6 weeks, maybe more. You mark the new wheels with charcoal, a date, a crude symbol to identify whose batch it is. Yours is a squiggly fish because your cousin took the star and you lack artistic ambition. The fish looks more like a worm. No one minds. Outside, the sky darkens. The air turns sharper, as if reminding you to wrap it up. You check the cave one last time. No leaks, no cracks, no missing cheese, which happens more than you'd think, especially with hungry dogs and hungrier cousins. You roll the empty sled back down the hill. Your hands smell like milk and damp rock. You're tired, a little sore, but satisfied. The cave now holds another small investment in your family's survival. If the fish dries up, if the sheep get sick, if the barley fails, you'll still have cheese. Later that night, you snack on a sliver of last month's wheel, just firm enough to slice, just sour enough to make your lips pucker. You chew slowly, the taste unfolding in layers, salt smoke, a hint of whatever herb accidentally fell into the curds during mixing. Your brother offers you a piece from his wheel. You try it. Pause. Tastes like it aged near the cows, you say diplomatically. He nods proudly. That's the secret. You stare into your bowl and wonder briefly if this is what prestige tastes like in Iceland. Probably. As the fire dies low and the wind picks up, you roll onto your side belly full of fermented milk and think of the cave on the hill, silent, dark, watching over your future one wheel at a time. You find a stash of lamb meat frozen solid since November and dare each other to lick it like a medieval popsicle. The snow crunches under your boots as you pry open the low door to the storage shed, really more of a hole dug into the side of a hill, reinforced with timber and covered in turf. Inside, the air hits your face like a punch from an ice god. Instantly, your nose hairs freeze. That's how you know the lamb is ready. You duck through the entrance, torch in hand, the flames sputtering in the cold, and crouch in front of the meat wall. Yes, meat wall. It's exactly what it sounds like, a stack of lamb legs, ribs, shoulder cuts, all frozen so solid you could probably use them to build a defense wall if raiders ever showed up. The pile rises in layers separated by straw and frozen cloth bundles, each one crusted with ice, each one a silent testament to some long-forgotten November slaughter. You reach for a leg near the top. It's light, too light. You tap it against the stone shelf, and it makes a hollow thunk. That one's freezer burned. You grimace and toss it back into the emergency soup stockpile. That'll be the one you boil down with hoof jelly if times get truly bleak. Next, you find a good cut. Thick, hefty. The ice glistens across the outer fat like sugar frosting on misery. You brush it off, smile to yourself, and sling it over your shoulder like some victorious hunter of the cold pantry. Then your cousin, already in the shed behind you, grins and says, "Bet you won't lick it." You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs, tongue to bone, full contact. You stare at the frozen lamb like it's suddenly become a test of your masculinity, courage, or general commitment to poor decisions. You first. He does. Just a quick press and then a yelp as he rips his tongue free, with a sound somewhere between a squelch and a prayer. You laugh so hard you nearly drop your torch. That's life here, humor mixed with hypothermia. Back outside, the wind whips around you as you carry the lamb toward the longhouse. It's too cold to cook it right away, would take hours just to thaw it. So you dunk it in a bucket of barely not frozen water and set it near the hearth, watching as frost slowly melts away like a tiny seasonal miracle. A quirky tradition. Some families named their frozen meat like honored guests, Old Stew, January dinner, or maybe Easter. You've always thought that was a little creepy, but now you catch yourself whispering, "You'd better be tender," as you pat the lamb dry with a cloth. Historians still argue whether medieval Icelanders truly relied on freezing as a planned preservation method, or simply accepted it as a bonus from the climate. In your experience, it's both. You plan to freeze things, but you also know winter can turn your pantry into a meat museum faster than expected. The cooking process is slow. You cut the lamb into manageable chunks, brown it over the hearth, and drop it into a pot with sour whey barley scraps and whatever herbs survive the frost. The broth starts off pale and lifeless, but by the second hour it darkens into something rich and soulful. The smell fills the longhouse, smoke salt, roasted fat, and the unmistakable perfume of, "Yes, we're actually eating meat tonight." Even the dog sits up straighter. As the stew simmers, your grandmother tells a story about the blizzard of 1127, when they ran out of everything except frozen ribs, ate lamb for 16 days straight, claimed it made their teeth stronger, also claimed it made the neighbor go blind for a week, but that part's still debated. Finally, the stew is done. You ladle it into wooden bowls thick with chunks of lamb, chewy grains, and the kind of steam that fogs your eyebrows. You burn your tongue on the first bite. Worth it. Someone toasts the frozen meat stash with a mug of sour milk. To freezers made of snow, he says. You all drink. Later that night, you trudge back to the shed to return the unused portion. You place it gently on the top of the pile, mark it with a bit of charcoal, and whisper, "See you in March." It's cold. It's quiet. The meat glows slightly in the torchlight, a pale relic of autumn labor. And somehow, even though your fingers are numb and your face aches from windburn, you smile. Because you know tucked into that frozen wall of flesh and frost is another week of warmth. Yes, you really do grow emergency grass inside your house because sheep are basically family, and hay is gold. It starts with a wooden trough, some half-frozen soil, and a look from your favorite ewe that says quite plainly, "Don't let me starve, peasant." You sigh, roll up your sleeves, and begin the absurd but entirely real ritual of indoor winter grass cultivation. You wouldn't think medieval Icelanders grew crops indoors, but when survival's on the line and the sheep are looking thin, you'll do just about anything. Especially when the haystack is already more hope than supply, and there's still at least 2 months of snow cover to go. So you fetch the long, narrow wooden box from behind the hearth, your family's emergency fodder trough. It's splintered, stained, and smells faintly like mold and milk, but it's still serviceable. You line the bottom with the finest dirt you can scrape up from your last thaw pit layer. It with dried manure for warmth and nutrients, and scatter a small handful of barley or grass seeds across the top like you're planting for the approval of the sheep gods. Then you wait. For light, you position the trough near the single greasy window in the longhouse. It lets in just enough sun to tease a few green blades out of the soil. You also rotate the trough every few days to avoid lopsided grass, which sounds ridiculous until your ram starts refusing one end of the box out of spite. The sheep wait, impatient. You feed them scraps in the meantime, bits of dried fish skin left over whey, even stale bread soaked in broth. But they know what's coming. They can smell it. One snorts in anticipation every time you walk past the trough like it's judging your agricultural pace. When the first blades sprout, there's an actual family meeting about how to divide it. You suggest giving it to the ewes, heavy with lamb. Your brother argues that the ram looks particularly thin. Your grandmother says she remembers when they used to eat indoor grass themselves, boiled and mashed into a paste she described as green sadness. You decide to let the pregnant ewes have the first bites. Watching them eat is oddly heartwarming. They nibble like it's the finest feast they've had in weeks, which, to be fair, it might be. You stroke one of their ears as it munches, feeling both proud and slightly humiliated that you've become an indoor grass farmer. A quirky fact. Some folks even tried sprouting moss or edible lichens on slabs of old bread or hide. Others got fancy and made sheep cakes, a kind of moldy, mashed-up mess of boiled root peelings, ash, and grass seed baked into patties and fed warm. The sheep either loved or loathed them, no middle ground. Historians still debate whether indoor fodder growing was common across Iceland or just a desperate improvisation in certain valleys. But in your home, it's tradition. You even keep a special small rake for turning the soil, affectionately nicknamed baby plow. You tend your grass carefully each day, watering it with leftover sour whey, diluted in snowmelt, singing to it quietly when no one's listening. Yes, really. You think it grows faster when you hum. Could be science, could be madness. Same difference in February. Eventually, your tiny crop reaches a few inches high, a delicate fuzz of green in a world gone white. You cut it with sheep shears, fluff it out on a plank, and carry it with ceremony to the pen. The ewes follow you like you're carrying gold, which, in a way, you are. They nibble delicately, then with urgency, then with that terrifying sheep intensity that says, I will push a toddler over for more of this. You ration it carefully, but they still bleat for seconds. You shake your head. You'll thank me in spring, you say, and you mean it, because every bite of green means a little more strength, a better lambing season, a higher chance they'll survive until the pastures thaw. You're not just feeding them, you're investing in your future fleece, milk, and meat. Later, when your cousin asks why your corner of the house smells like wet dirt and animal breath, you gesture grandly to your trough. It's a garden, you say. A very sheep-specific garden. He rolls his eyes, then asks for help starting his own. And so it spreads. By mid-March, half the longhouse is lined with tiny green patches, each one tended like a shrine. The sheep bleat with increasing smugness. You're running out of dirt and bowls. But the grass is growing, the sheep are eating, and spring is crawling closer one blade at a time. The oldest horse dies. You quietly butcher it and cook the stew while pretending it never had a name. You knew it was coming. The old mare, gray, slow, and stubborn to the very end, hasn't stood up in 2 days. Her breathing shallow, her eyes always sharp with mischief, now drift somewhere between this world and the next. You sit beside her in the frost-bitten stall, wrapped in a wool cloak, your hand resting gently on her flank. The others are waiting outside. She was never supposed to make it through this winter, but still, you hoped. When she passes just before dawn, the silence is heavier than usual. You close her eyes with your hand, whisper something no one else needs to hear, and step out into the morning fog. Then you sharpen the knife. Horse meat isn't common fare here, not because it's taboo, but because horses are too valuable to eat without cause. They're transport status companionship. Eating one is an act of solemn necessity, not routine. And this one, she carried you as a child, pulled sleds, saved your uncle from a river crossing gone wrong. She was family. But she's food now. You and your brother drag her body to the side, clearing a place you've used before. The ground is frozen, so there's no digging. You set to work where she fell. First, the hide, thick, rough, surprisingly hard to pierce. Then muscle, sectioned with care. You save everything, ribs, flanks, tongue, even the tail hair for rope making. You do not say her name. Inside the longhouse, your aunt has already cleared a space near the hearth. A large pot bubbles with sour whey and barley. You carry the first haunch in, set it beside her, and nod. She doesn't ask where it came from. The meat goes in chunks, slowly browning, releasing fat, transforming the smell of grief into something savory and survival-minded. It's rich, oily, unfamiliar, stronger than lamb, sweeter than beef, a taste you don't forget. You sit down near the fire, the warmth licking at your boots, and watch the pot. Someone hums. No one speaks the truth of the matter, but you all know. And still you're grateful, because this stew might get you through another 2 weeks, maybe 3. A quirky historical fact: some Icelandic folktales claim that eating horse meat during winter can grant enduring strength. Whether that's true or just a way to feel better about eating your old riding buddy, well, you take what comfort you can get. The children ask what's in the pot. You shrug. Meat. They nod. They've learned not to push it. Later, when your sister slices into a piece and says, "This tastes like riding weather," you nearly choke on your spoon. You both laugh, then go quiet again. Historians still argue whether Icelanders avoided horse meat for religious reasons or cultural sentiment. Pagan rites once involved horse sacrifices, but after Christianity took hold, horse eating was often frowned upon unless survival required it, which, let's be honest, it usually did. That night you bring a small bowl to the stall where the horse once lay. You pour the broth into the straw, a quiet offering. No one sees you do it. No one has to. It's between you and her. The stew is portioned out over the next several days. Every bite matters. Every spoonful helps preserve the hay for the sheep, the fish for spring, the skyr for later. Her strength becomes yours. Her warmth fills your belly. Still, when the snow begins to melt and the first grass pokes through the ground, you find yourself glancing at the empty stall. Not with guilt, with thanks. You scrape the cheese mold, or do you leave it? Historians still argue whether it was hazard or helpful. The wheel stares back at you from the pantry shelf, smug in its soft halo of fuzzy gray-green. You squint, lean, and sniff. Definitely mold. The kind that makes your stomach clench and your curiosity rise in equal measure. You reach for the cheese knife, pause midair, and glance over your shoulder like you're about to commit a crime. In medieval Iceland, there's no consensus on moldy cheese. Some folks scrape it off, others eat around it, and a few bold, possibly cursed, swear the mold makes the cheese. It's where the flavor lives, your cousin says, already sawing himself a wedge. Like the soul of the cow fermented. You're not sure the cow would agree. You slice into the wheel with slow reverence. The rind gives way to a pale, dense center, crumbly, sharp-smelling, slightly wet near the edges. The mold clings to the top and sides like a wool blanket left in the cellar too long. You scrape a bit onto your knife tip. Just a nibble. The flavor punches first, then leans back and lets the sourness settle in. It's earthy, aggressive, not entirely unpleasant, but definitely a food that announces itself. Your throat tingles. Your tongue debates filing a complaint. You swallow and wait for consequences. None arrive. You take another bite. This cheese was aged in the corner of the cave nearest the runoff stone's cooler, damper prime real estate for mold's little vacation home. You've rotated the wheel every few days, kept it off the ground, wrapped it in linen infused with whey. You did everything right, and still it grew. A quirky note from the old herder's book. Your grandmother keeps under her mattress. If the mold grows blue, your luck is true. If the mold grows green, keep your cheese lean. If the mold grows black, don't turn your back. She swears by that rhyme, recites it every equinox. You cut another slice, trimming the rind this time, and pass it to your brother. He eyes the mold, shrugs, and bites. Tastes like the cave smells, he says. But you know, chewier. You store the rest in a fresh cloth, this time soaked in salted whey, and place it on the top shelf, hoping the mold doesn't spread. Or does, depending on which uncle you ask. Historians still argue whether medieval Icelanders understood mold as a natural part of the aging process or a signal of spoilage. There are mentions of green skins forming on food in sagas. Some tolerated, some feared, but mostly people ate what didn't kill them yesterday. You bring the cheese to the hearth that night, serve it with skyr and a slab of dried mutton. It's a surprisingly elegant meal for a home that smells faintly of hooves and hard labor. The cheese's sharpness cuts through the fatty lamb. A splash of sour milk cleans your palate. You could almost convince yourself this is cuisine. The children try a bite, immediately make gagging noises. It's like chewing old socks, one says. You nod. But rich socks, you reply. High-status socks. Even the dog refuses a dropped crumb. You assume he's holding out for marrow. Later you find your sister attempting to make her own mold-friendly cloth wrap, using ash and dried mint. Might keep the fuzzy part from tasting like dead moss, she explains. You nod solemnly and back away. By candlelight you sketch a rough note on a piece of hide, wheel, weight, taste, mold, color. You've started keeping records, quietly, just in case you discover something worth repeating. You mark this one tolerable, slightly floral, no visions. The wind whistles under the door. A snowflake slips through a crack and lands on your boot. Winter still owns the land, but you've got cheese. Questionable, flavorful, surprisingly satisfying cheese. You settle in for the night, your stomach full, your mind wandering. Maybe next year you'll age a batch on purpose with mold. Maybe you'll call it sky mold and pretend it's an ancestral delicacy. Or maybe you'll scrape it off and keep pretending you have standards. No, not like that. This one's alive. You're insulating it under turf with just the nose poking out until spring. You've buried many things this winter: fish shark, leftover bread, a barrel of regrettable sour milk. But this is the first time you're burying something that's still breathing. The lamb bleats softly in your arms, warm and confused. You tighten your wool cloak around it and step carefully into the lee of the longhouse, where the wind doesn't bite quite so hard and the ground hasn't frozen all the way through. It's late in the season and hay is disappearing like gossip in a small village. You've got enough left for the milk-producing ewes and maybe one goat that your grandmother insists can sense earthquakes. Everyone else, they're on the borderline. So now you're turning to an old method passed down with all the confidence of something that's just crazy enough to work. Partial sheep burial. Yes, you're going to plant your sheep, not to kill it, to save it. You dig a shallow trench in the dry turf just deep enough for the lamb to lie snugly inside. You line the bottom with a mix of dry straw and old wool, soft, insulating, not too damp. Then you lower the lamb gently, in leaving only its nose and part of its face exposed to the air. It blinks up at you. You pat its head. You'll be fine, you murmur, as if that's ever comforted anyone about being buried alive. Then you start piling the turf back over it. The idea is simple: underground temperatures stay relatively stable, and a buried lamb loses far less body heat than one walking around the snowdrifts like a woolen popsicle. It doesn't have to burn calories keeping warm, it just has to wait. And with limited feed, that's the best chance it has. You tuck the final flap of sod around its neck like a scarf. It sighs, not in protest, more like resignation. A sheep's version of, okay, whatever this is, I'm in. You step back and survey your work. It looks like a very low-effort grave. If graves had noses. A quirky tradition. Some families marked each buried sheep with a carved stick or a colored stone to keep track of who was buried where. You've seen diagrams scratched into door frames. Mossy lump equals snuffles. Flat mound equals bitey. Someone once forgot and buried two on top of each other. The chaos was woolly. You mark this lamb spot with a loop of red yarn and scratch a tiny L into the doorpost. Then you move on. There's another one waiting. In total, you bury 3 lambs and 1 stubborn old goat who's honestly just enjoying the spa treatment. You check on them daily, adjusting turf, clearing snow from their little air holes, making sure none of them have decided to panic and wriggle free. Historians still argue whether this technique was widespread or a regional trick known only in the more desperate valleys. Some say it was seasonal. Others insist it was the stuff of sagas, a tale of frugal genius and the occasional frozen beard. Your family just calls it grazing on dreams. Inside the longhouse, you warm your fingers near the fire and chew dried cheese while your brother recounts a time when they buried a ram for 3 days, and he came out enlightened. You're not sure what that means, but the ram did spend a week staring at walls afterward. That night, you dream of sheep noses poking through snowbanks, forming a kind of woolly chorus line across the valley. It's not comforting. The next morning, you check on the lambs. Their breath fogs the air in slow puffs. They're warm, still, that's a wind. You slip them a few strands of hay each. Not too much, just enough to keep their spirits up. You pet the goat. He winks at you. Back inside, your grandmother is making hoof jelly again. You decide the sheep hole was the most normal part of your day. Later, you log each burial in your hide notebook, just a small entry. Lamb 1, back wall north side, good mood. Because in this world, keeping track of your half-submerged livestock is just part of being a responsible farmer. And as weird as it all is, it's working. The sheep are warm, the hay is stretching, and you're inventing new ways to make hope out of dirt and wool. You pack rancid butter into animal skins, paddle out to a trade ship, and pray it buys a new axe head. It's trade day, which in theory is exciting new goods outside news. Maybe a flirtatious glance from a stranger who isn't related to you, but mostly it means you're about to row across freezing water with a pouch full of smelly butter and a list of desperate hopes. You start by preparing the goods. First up, sursmur rancid butter. Yes, rancid. Not a mistake, not a tragedy. This is intentional. You take butter that's been stored in a skin bag since late summer, buried near the stream, and lovingly ignored while it fermented into something sharper. It's thick, yellow-gray, smells like someone tried to make cheese inside a boot, but it's prized in trade, used for lamp fuel cooking, and if you ask your uncle, as a very aggressive laxative. You spoon it into a cleaned sheep stomach, knot the top, and wrap it in linen. Next, dried fish, smoked lamb, a wheel of cave-aged cheese, the one without visible mold, and 2 small skeins of wool. Modest but valuable. You pack everything onto the sled and haul it toward the inlet, where the boat waits like a cold wooden promise. The sea is calm, but the wind is not. It bites. Your hands ache just from gripping the oar. Your cousin rows beside you, humming a low tune to distract from the rhythmic creaking of the hull. In the distance, a dot of sails flutters against the sky, a trading ship likely from the Faroes or Norway anchored just off the coast. You row harder. By the time you reach the ship, your arms are shaking, your lips are cracked, and your butter bag is starting to leak slightly. You wipe it with your sleeve and pretend that's fine. The traders lower a rope ladder. You climb aboard with the stiff enthusiasm of someone trying not to vomit seawater and nerves. The crew greets you in rough Icelandic eyebrows twitching at the smell coming from your pouch. One says you brought the good stuff. You nod, extra sour. Trade begins. You lay out your goods on a plank table, the rancid butter, the fish, the wool. In return, you're eyeing several items: iron tools, a bolt of waxed cloth, a set of sewing needles, your mother's only request, and one beautiful, cold, perfect axe head. It gleams, you want it. Negotiations are tense. The butter's your big chip, rarer now that winter's in full swing. The trader smells it, grimaces, nods. He tests the wool with fingers worn from rope and salt, sniffs the cheese, swears softly in Norse. In the end, you get what you came for. The axe head goes into your bag. The needles, too. The wax cloth. You trade a hunk of skyr for that with a joke about exporting the sour back home. No one laughs, but you still get the cloth. A quirky fact, Icelandic traders sometimes sealed butter bags with carved wooden stoppers, bearing family symbols, part recipe marker, part branding, part passive-aggressive culinary pride. Yours is a spiral with a little dent. It means fermented with intention. Historians still debate how central butter was to the Icelandic trade economy. Was it a niche luxury or a staple barter item? You don't care. All you know is this rancid butter just bought you an axe capable of splitting frozen bones and kindling both. You climb back into your boat with the goods, a few sore muscles and a smug sense of economic triumph. The return trip is harder against the wind through light chop, but you're lighter in cargo and heavier in victory. At shore, your family meets you with eager hands and questions. You hand your mother the needles. She beams. Your father tests the axe edge against his thumb, nods approvingly. Your brother immediately asks if there's any butter left to eat. You lie and say no. That night you hang the axe head above the hearth, a gleaming symbol of fermented dairy diplomacy. The cheese goes on the shelf. The wax cloth becomes new wrappings for the sheep. The needles vanish into a pouch so fast, you wonder if your mother has teleportation powers. You sit by the fire, a mug of warm sour milk in hand, and reflect. You traded butter that would make most people gag for tools that might carry your family through spring. You paddled into a biting sea to turn kitchen leftovers into survival. And now you're watching your cousin sniff his sleeve and realize the butter leaked into the sled. A quiet win. You scratch tally marks into a stone slab, tracking how many smoked legs of lamb you haven't already eaten. You shuffle through the dim light of the storage shed, rubbing your cold fingers together, torch flickering in one hand, the other dragging along the rough stone wall until it finds the familiar grooves, your winter ledger. It's not fancy, just a flat slab of basalt wedged into the back corner of the food room, leaning at a slight angle against the wall. But across its face run dozens of scratches, short vertical cuts etched deep with a flint knife. Every mark represents something: a fish, a bag of barley, a leg of smoked lamb, a wheel of cheese. And every few days you scratch out a line when something's used up. You press your thumb over the meat column, still 5 tallies left. You count again to make sure your memory isn't as reliable as the marks themselves. Then you walk over to the hooks. Above you in the rafters hang the meat-blackened legs of lamb wrapped in linen and crusted with smoke and thyme. Some still feel heavy, others suspiciously light. You tap one, it thuds. That's good. Another feels soft around the middle. You set it aside for soup. Keeping inventory isn't optional. It's the line between survival and the awkward family meeting that starts with, "So who forgot to ration the barley?" You pull out your bone knife and scratch another tally into the stone. You add a small triangle next to it, a personal code meaning lean meat needs cooking soon. It's a system passed down from your grandmother, who used to run this household like a military outpost disguised as a smokehouse. You still remember her voice echoing through the longhouse? Don't trust your stomach. Trust the wall. A quirky tidbit. Some families in remote valleys actually carved their tallies into bones, particularly jawbones, of sheep or cows. These were portable, often notched with dots or symbols for special items like honey or extra wool. You once found one buried in a storage box with notes about a missing cheese wheel and something ominous labeled goat incident. Historians still argue whether these tally systems were personal, shared, or semi-ritual. In your case, it's part math, part memory, part mild panic management. You run your hand across the stone following old marks. Early winter, midwinter. Now, you realize you've already gone through more meat than planned. The fish pile is holding steady, but the cheese count is dangerously low. And you forgot to subtract the 2 dried sausages your cousin devoured last week while checking for frost damage. You add a note, 2 sausages. Blame Einar. That night back in the longhouse, you gather the family to update them. Your sister groans when you mention the cheese. Your father insists you're overestimating. Your aunt suggests a recount. You remind them all that last year they ignored the tally system and ended up boiling shoe leather in March. That shuts them up. You serve a portion of smoked lamb that evening, thin slices, slightly chewy, but rich with flavor. You pair it with dried fish, sour whey, and the last of the barley flatbread. It's enough. Just enough. After the meal, you update the wall again. 1 lamb leg shared. You almost draw a smiley face next to it, but decide dignity matters too. You also add a small new mark beside the bones section. You've got a plan to boil them down later this week, even the leftover ones, especially the leftover ones. Inventory is more than counting. It's hope management. It's the act of turning fear into preparation, hunger into math. The wall doesn't lie. The wall doesn't forget. Unlike your brother who still insists he didn't eat the missing cheese wedge from 3 nights ago. You carve a final note before turning and watch sausage stash. Possible theft ring forming. Then you put out your torch, step out into the dark, and whisper thanks to the stone for holding your secrets and your dinner plan. You debate whether to slaughter the runt or risk overgrazing next spring. Your decision echoes into next year's hunger. It's nearly dawn when the bleeding starts. A sharp, lonely cry, not panicked, just persistent. You sit up from your straw mat, blink into the dim light filtering through the smoke hole, and sigh. You already know who it is. The runt, born late during a thaw that tricked the ewe into thinking spring had come early. Small, scrawny, and somehow still alive, it wobbles around the pen like a wool-wrapped question mark. Every day it takes more than it gives, nursing longer, eating more, but barely growing. And now the family's beginning to ask the question, should it live? You wrap your cloak around your shoulders and step into the pen. The air is heavy with animal breath, hay dust, and something faintly sour. The lamb wobbles toward you, bleats again. Its tiny hooves click against the floor like pebbles. It nuzzles your leg with a pink nose and zero understanding of economics. You crouch and stroke its head, soft wool, sharp ribs, big eyes full of unhelpful charm. The family gathers over morning flatbread. No one wants to say it directly, well, except your grandmother, who's halfway through her second slice and mutters, if it can't pull its own weight, it pulls someone else down. Your father says nothing but keeps chewing slowly. Your sister suggests rechecking the hay count. Your brother offers to sneak it extra food from his share. You stare into your bowl and think about grass. Because that's what it comes down to, grass. Or more precisely, how much of it you'll have in May, when the snow finally lets go. Every mouthful that lamb takes now is one your stronger animals might need later. A quirky note from the sagas. There's a tale of a farmer who raised a runt lamb through the whole winter, only for it to die on the first warm day from the shock of sun. Whether true or not, you've never forgotten that image. all effort, no reward. Historians still argue whether Icelandic farmers practiced strict culling or gambled on long-term gain. Some suggest a mix. A few runts were saved out of sentiment or superstition. Others culled ruthlessly, with cold logic honed by generations of hunger. You spend the day gathering moss to line the feeding troughs. The lamb follows you like a dog tripping over its own feet, nearly tumbling into a bucket of fermented whey. It sneezes and bleats. You roll your eyes. It's ridiculous. It's a liability. It's also alive. That evening you stand by the pen with a knife in one hand and hesitation in the other. The lamb looks up at you, not understanding, just existing. It doesn't know it's on trial. It just wants to stay warm. You call the family together. There's a silence as dense as frozen turf. Then your sister says, "We can try." So you do. You make space near the hearth. You feed it extra whey. You comb its coat to chase off fleas. And when it nestles into your side later that night, you pretend it's just for heat, not because you've made a decision you hope you won't regret. You add a line in your tally book, runt spared, extra feed monitor. You also scribble a second note in smaller letters, name TBD. Weeks pass. The lamb gets stronger, still small, still strange, but sturdier now. It starts headbutting a wooden bucket like it's proving a point. The family stops watching it quite so closely. You stop holding your breath. By March, it's still alive, still eating, still yours. And when the first grass pushes through the snow and your sheep shuffle outside to graze, you watch the runt stumble into the light, blink, and take its first bite. And just like that, your gamble blooms green underfoot. Everyone gathers by firelight, counting mouthfuls and hoping the neighbor's stockpile spoils first. The ration night is not a feast. It's not even really a meal. It's a calculation performed with wooden bowls and unspoken math, where every mouthful is weighed in memory and hope. You sit cross-legged near the hearth. Around you, your family settles into the same worn places, father sharpening a knife that hasn't seen fresh meat in 2 weeks, sister knitting more out of habit than necessity, cousin already dozing with one eye open. The fire is low but steady, fed with driftwood and dry dung patties. The room smells like wool ash and quiet dread. Tonight's dinner is dried fish barley gruel and one hard sliver of cheese you almost forgot existed. You break it carefully as if dividing something sacred, which, to be fair, you are. The bowls are passed around. You ladle with care, 3 spoonfuls here, 2 there, a tiny extra scrape for the youngest. Every ration is fair-ish. Hunger doesn't care about fairness, and neither does your father when it's his turn last and only foam is left in the pot. You eat in silence, save for the occasional clink of wooden spoon against wooden bowl. The fish is dry enough to scratch your throat. The barley has a faint taste of smoke. Someone crunches a bone chip and doesn't complain. Everyone knows this meal was supposed to stretch 2 more days. But here you are. Later, the counting begins. Your mother pulls out the tally bone, a sheep jaw smoothed with years of touch. Tiny notches mark food stores, meat, cheese, fish, barley. She traces each one, slowly, lips moving in private arithmetic. Then she looks up. We're down to 12. You all nod. You don't ask 12 what. You already know 12 meals, maybe 13 if you stretch the barley. Fewer if anyone gets sick. You glance toward the wall where the cheese shelf sits mostly bare. Only 1 round left. Moldy, firm, precious. Your brother stares at it like it owes him money. A quirky aside, Some families carved food prayer runes into the base of their bowls, tiny marks meant to bless the meal or shame the eater into being grateful. You check yours, just a scratched spiral, your grandmother's mark for endure. Outside, the wind hisses against the turf roof. Somewhere in the distance a raven cries out, then falls silent. You imagine your neighbor's food shed, probably stocked a little better. They had a stronger lambing season, more barley, better luck. You think if theirs spoils, we'll be okay. You don't say it out loud, but you think it. Everyone does. There's no malice in it, just strategy. If their fish goes moldy, maybe they'll trade for wool. If their cheese rots, maybe they'll barter for sour milk. If they go hungry first, maybe you'll have a few more bites before it's your turn. Historians still argue whether such quiet rivalries ever broke into open theft or violence. Some say rural Icelanders banded together in hardship. Others hint at disappearances during lean winters. All you know is that you lock your food shed every night, just in case. You glance at the hearth. The youngest has fallen asleep beside it, clutching his empty bowl like a toy. Your aunt pulls a fur over him and kisses his head. You dip your spoon into your barley and scrape the last bit. It tastes like dust and salt, and you swallow it gratefully. You pass your bowl to your sister to wash. With snow, there's no water to spare for dishes. Just a handful of frozen flakes rubbed with wool, then wiped clean. Before bed, your father counts the remaining dried fish. You see his lips move. 8 pieces, no more. You lie down on your straw mat, full enough to sleep, hungry enough to dream. The fire flickers. Someone coughs. The cheese shelf sighs under its own weight. Tomorrow you'll recount everything again. Because this is how you ration winter, not just with bowls and spoons, but with breath, memory, and quietly wishing your neighbor's weigh bucket sours before yours. March arrives, your pantry's nearly empty, and every preserved bite must now prove it was worth the wait. You wake to birdsong. Not a chorus, just one brave, confused voice calling from somewhere near the eaves. You sit up slowly, your muscles aching from another night on straw, and blink at the dim gray sliver of dawn sliding under the door. It's March. You pull on your wool cloak, stiff with smoke and sleep, and shuffle to the pantry. The door creaks. The cold hits your face, your breath fogs instantly, but there's something different in the air. Less bite, less threat, almost permission. Still, the shelf is nearly bare. A single dried fish hangs limp from its string, a lone survivor in a row of empty hooks. Beside it, a half jar of sour skyr, a tiny twist of cheesecloth with hardened butter, and one shriveled sausage that squeaks when you poke it. Your inventory tally is down to hopeful pencil smudges. You sigh, then smile. You made it. Barely. March in Iceland isn't exactly spring. It's the idea of spring. A promise whispered under the snow. The pastures are still frozen, the wind still slashes your face if you stay out too long, but daylight lingers a little longer each evening. You can feel something shifting. You prepare breakfast like it's a final exam, a strip of fish rewarmed in the hearth coals, a spoon of skyr thinned with snowmelt, one precious crumble of barley flatbread. You chew slowly. Every bite is a review of your entire winter. That fish, dried in a perfect windstorm back in October. The skyr, a survivor of your second fermentation batch, the one that almost molded but didn't. The bread baked on the day you thought you'd run out of flour, only to find a forgotten pouch tucked behind a wheel of semi-cursed cheese. Every decision, every cut, scrape, turn, and tally has led to this breakfast. You swallow. It tastes like effort. The family eats in silence, not from solemnity but from tiredness, the kind that settles in your bones when rationing turns from math to art. You pass the butter. You lie and say, there's still more. You check the animals. The sheep are hungry but alive. The runt, yes, the runt is still here, still chewing the frozen edges of a hay clump like it owes him money. The goat, meanwhile, has decided to sleep standing upright, against the wall, possibly out of spite. You unbury the lamb you stashed in turf back in January. She's stiff, but breathing, eyes wide, nose twitching. You dig her out carefully, pet her neck, whisper an apology. She blinks once. You call that forgiveness. A quirky tradition. Some folks mark the first warm breeze of March by stirring their storage pits with a luck stick, a carved twig meant to wake the food spirits. You don't believe in it, but you do it anyway, and somehow the act feels important. Historians still argue whether March was more feared or more celebrated in medieval Iceland. You think it was both. It's the month of judgment, of what's left, of realizing every preserved bite must now do more than survive. It has to matter. You clean out the pantry, sweep the crumbs into a cloth, scrape the last bits of fat from the sausage. You boil bones that have already been boiled twice. You invent soup from air and memory. You write the final tally into your stone ledger. Last fish gone, last cheese eaten by your cousin in the dark, last dried meat turned out to be bark. That was a low point. And still you're here. You step outside. The wind is less cruel today. There's meltwater dripping from the edge of the roof. You swear you saw green on a distant slope. The long dark is ending. You roll your shoulders, take a deep breath, and head back inside. One more stew, one more ration, one more day toward pasture. And as you sit by the fire staring into the orange glow, you realize you didn't just store food for winter. You stored yourself. One decision, one bite, one slab of fish at a time. Now, as the fire dims to coals and the night folds itself gently around your walls of turf and stone, you lie back and let your limbs soften. The wind outside no longer howls, it whispers, as if tired of its own voice. The sheep shift in their stalls, quiet now, full-bellied enough to sleep. The last scraps of food in your pantry hum in your thoughts. Not just what they were, but what they became. Time capsules of effort, testaments to grit stories packed in salt and smoke. You remember the first fish you dried, the last cheese you feared to cut the mold. You debated with a philosopher's frown. Each item, each flavor, each silence at the dinner bench was a small act of belief. You feel the weight of the season lifting, not entirely, but enough. The floor beneath you holds a little less dread. The air carries a hint of melt, of thaw, of new beginnings hiding just below the crust of snow. You close your eyes. You did what had to be done, with bare hands, with cracked lips, with wisdom passed through glances, not words. You made it to the other side of winter, not by luck, not by chance, but by care. Now sleep. Let the bones you boiled and the butter you bartered rest with you. Let your breath slow, your shoulders loosen, your thoughts wander down winding sheep trails toward warmer months. You're safe, you're full, you're ready for green. End of script. Sweet dreams.